Welcome to On the Middle East, Al Monitor's podcast about the big stories of the day. My name is Amber Zaman, and today I'll be discussing the final results of Turkey's elections, which saw further victory for President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. What lies ahead for the opposition, and can Turkey revert to a more democratic path? Or is it curtains for Turkish democracy? My guest is Howard Eissenstat, an associate professor of Middle East history at St. Lawrence University in New York and a seasoned scholar of Turkish politics. Howard is among those who consistently predicted the outcome, even as leading pollsters indicated that the opposition candidate would likely unseat Erdogan for the first time. So welcome to our program, Howard. It's great to have you here with us today.
Thanks, Amber, and it's great to be here.
So you called it right. You, from the get-go, have been consistently predicting this outcome. So tell us why this happened. Why are we faced with this result when, for all the obvious reasons, Erdogan should have lost?
So, I mean, I will say that it's possible that I'm right for the wrong reasons, right? It's certainly possible that another candidate could have done better, but fundamentally, I think that the problem isn't the candidates; it's systemic. That President Erdogan has created a system that, yes, requires electoral support, but it's so thoroughly gamed that, for all the reasons that we know about the press and the control of the state functions and the use of security services and the use of prosecutions, it's a long list. But if we're playing with marked cards, you're going to win regardless of whether I play well or badly.
Yes, but you now see the opposition sort of hoping for a big economic crash. They see that as, their sole hope of ever winning power back. And clearly with these local elections looming in March, it's difficult to imagine that Erdogan would do a course correction and, revert to more rational economic policies. I think he will continue to spend his way in the hopes of recapturing Istanbul. I think that's going to be his main goal. So between now and March, do you think that the economy will be able to survive? Will the opposition get its big wish?
Well, I mean, certainly the municipal elections are a more favorable ground for the opposition than national elections. And the stakes for President Erdogan are less existential. They're about revenue and rent for his cronies and not about, whether he goes to jail or stays in the palace. That said, I think that it's going to be a tough go. And for the in Izmir, Ankara, and Istanbul, the races were close, but in all of those cases, the opposition won. So I think the opposition has reason to hope, and I don't think they need the economy to absolutely crash for them to have a chance. That said, we can expect more of the same. We can expect more use of prosecutions. We can expect more effective use of the media. The populations in the big cities are more internet connected, which lessens the effect of control of the mainstream media. But yeah, I mean, I called Istanbul wrong in 2019. So I'm going to, I'm going to hedge my bets. But Erdogan wants Istanbul back very, very badly.
And so
you know,
here's where the Kurds actually do matter. I think that all of us, well, not you perhaps, but I certainly would say this about myself, we overstated the weight of the Kurds in the national elections, based on the fact that, they were so pivotal in Istanbul. And that doesn't necessarily translate to national politics, as we saw. And Erdogan
well, yeah,
prevailed without them, and by actually demonizing them, in fact, and casting Kılıçdaroğlu and them as terrorists. So
I mean,
do you think he's going to need them, though, to win back Istanbul? Because, he lost big in Istanbul precisely because of the Kurds. Can we
what,
sort of imagine him being the pragmatist that he is, making that kind of
no,
turn?
no, I don't think that, given the profile of Erdogan's coalition, I don't think that he's capable of doing that. The concern is that, and here the runoff election is I think indicative. The concern isn't that the Kurds will return to Erdogan. The concern is that a significant number of Kurdish voters will simply stay home and vote none
Yeah.
of the above.
Yeah, especially given what happened in the last week ahead of the runoff, when we saw Kılıçdaroğlu sort of become Mr. Racist, basically.
Yeah. I mean,
That was
so
pretty sad to observe, and all the more so that it didn't deliver the desired
yeah,
result.
I mean, I think the argument could be made that it was a necessary evil. I wouldn't buy that, but I'm not sure that it worked. I'm
No, it
not
didn't.
sure.
It absolutely didn't
You know,
work. He's
we
lost.
got a drop of 3% in voter turnout, and most of that drop was in Kurdish dominated regions.
Yeah.
So it's he may have gained some votes, but he lost, as far as I can see, and I haven't done a deep dive. As far as I can see, he lost more than he gained there.
So I guess Erdogan can bank on as you said, some of them, enough of them not going to the polls, and of course also turn to the, dirty tricks department, proceed with the legal case against İmamoğlu and perhaps lock him up before the election, or at least unseat him.
So
So
locking him up before the election is actually potentially very costly, because it might create the sense that he's removing a candidate and thereby circumventing democratic elections. And everybody across the political spectrum is invested in the idea that the elections are competitive, even when they're not super competitive. So I certainly could be wrong, but I don't expect İmamoğlu to be jailed in advance of the elections. I can imagine him being banned from politics if he wins.
okay, well, I mean, but zooming out, one of the critiques of Turkey, one of the analysis of Turkey by certain academics is that, it's hopeless for the opposition because Erdogan has created this society of lower class, the lower class masses who just don't have the education or the aspirations to want anything better. Do you agree as an academic with that assessment? Because if it's true, yeah. Plus, people are getting even poorer with these policies. So an even greater pool of voters, paradoxically, for Erdogan, if we're to go by that analysis.
Sure. There is around the world a greater polarization of electorates, and so the number of movable voters has necessarily diminished. I'm not entirely convinced by the Erdogan gets votes only from the uneducated and the poor. I don't think that that's...
Somebody put a figure on it. They said, I think it was Ersin Kalaycıoğlu, 40%, he said. This was a few years ago, but recent enough.
I think that the question is how do you for that 15% of the electorate that's potentially movable, how can you move them? I think that actually İmamoğlu is a good example of how you can do so. Not simply because the whole campaign of love type stuff, but because he, like Erdogan, represents that demographic of new urbanites, of people who move to urban areas in the 60s, 70s, 80s, right? And he can speak the language of that really central demographic in a way that, say, Kılıçdaroğlu couldn't. I don't think it's a matter of lack of information necessarily, so much as a way of that the government has been able to define the terms of debate. I'm staying with family in a very CHP neighborhood, in a very CHP household, and there's no sympathy whatsoever for President Erdogan. But I'm struck as I talk to them about different issues, about the Kurds, about the economy, about foreign policy, how fully the conversation has been defined by an AKP-dominated media. Yeah, and so I mean, if Erdogan can continue to frame the terms of debate, that puts any opposition candidate, no matter how charismatic, at a real disadvantage.
And also, in the case of Turkey being a 99% Sunni Muslim country, of course, it's very hard to, promote democracy when people are saying Islam, at least when it comes to the ethical, moral arguments, how can you place this sort of Western system of, democracy, free market, whatever, hold it as an alternative to what Allah is saying, to Islam? I mean, you may you're sort of...
I'm shaking my head.
I just don't... head, but I think it helps Erdogan in his narrative for sure. Religion,
well, I think it helps, but not because if you're arguing that Turkey's going to be majoritarian, that that there's going to be a built-in intolerance for diversity, I am very clearly agree with you, but I'm not sure that translates into anti-capitalism or anti-West or even anti-secularism. I think that what it means is that one has to, and this is what I think Erdogan does. I don't think of Erdogan as particularly imposing Islam, certainly not compared to his Middle Eastern counterparts.
I'm not at that pace for sure, but that's definitely the trend socially and symbolically. I mean, with the conversion.
Symbolically, yes, yeah. and that's kind of my point.
And I think that, in the early days when we thought he was doing great things, he was doing the opposite, saying, these two things are not contradictory. Islam and democracy do meld perfectly, and here we're the best example of that. But I think he would say the same thing today. Shifted away from the democratic path, I think by default he's had to sort of maybe draw a line between the two, at least through his actions and by way of justifying everything else that he's doing that's not great, if you follow my reasoning.
Yeah, I do. But I think
I'm not trying to
I think
vilify
we
the
disagree.
religion, by the way. I'm a Muslim, and
Sure. No, I think we disagree. I think that fundamentally, what he did in 2005 or six and what he's doing now are very similar, which is he's selling policies using Islamic symbols and arguing that nationalism and economic growth and religion are all combined. That's what populists do. They put modern policies in traditional garb. I don't think that Erdogan is he certainly doesn't claim to be anti-democratic. He would argue vociferously that Islam and democracy are can combine very nicely, and that he represents that.
Yes, but he's not credible anymore.
Yeah, I think that what makes him so effective is that he uses Islamic symbols, but I don't think that precludes the opposition from doing the same. I think that the opposition, and I think Imamoglu was pretty sophisticated about doing this, about talking about modernity and development and tolerance in Islamic terms. So we do disagree. I think that there's I don't think that.
Oh, I'm not suggesting that the opposition can't use the same tactics, but I think it's far more convincing coming from someone like Erdogan, who's born out of the Islamic movement, who is trained as an imam, who in his personal life is extremely pious. He doesn't drink rakı, as Imamoglu does. He's much more convincing to these people who, I mean, I think it's such a huge indictment ultimately of the Kemalist system that he's still so popular and that people still feel that they had been so badly repressed their faith, and that if the others come back, will revert back to that same oppression.
I mean, I think that as you were talking, I was thinking about Semra Özal's thing,
and
I'll
this
drink
is
my whiskey.
The wife of the former president, by the way, to those in our audience who don't know who we're talking about.
I like my whiskey and I like my prayer, right? I think that a sophisticated political message uses the tropes of the culture, whether it's Christianity or Anatolianness or whatever. Then they use the tropes of the culture to package whatever policies they want. And Erdogan is absolutely a master of this. And I don't think it's just about religion. I think it's about.
Oh no, I agree with you, but I was just saying it helps, I think, a lot.
It does. And I think that
relies on it more and more again.
Yeah. I think, if I were casting an opposition candidate, just on sort of qualities, I would certainly want somebody who went to Friday prayer. Look, I know lots of secular Turks who go to Friday prayer.
Oh, absolutely. And people in the army, for the army was always caricaturized as these people who just drink gallons of whiskey, have their wives wear mini skirts and dye their hair blonde. I knew many people in the military who were perfectly secular, pro-Western in their own way, who did fast during the Ramadan. I recall very vividly. So, yeah. I think that there are a lot of tropes out there, as you say.
So, I mean, I think, look, we're focusing right now on sort of the qualities of political candidacy
Yeah.
rather than sort of the repression, which I think kind of gets things backwards. But just for the point, if just as in the United States, the most viable candidate to take on Trumpism is somebody who drives a pickup truck and hunts, and who basically can take away all of those tropes of who's really sort of the grassroots. I think that that's true for Turkey as well. I think that when you're fighting a populist, you're best off having a candidate who can sort of mitigate those claims to
No,
cultural.
I perfectly agree with you. No, I agree with you 100%. It has to be somebody in the center, if not to the center right. That's
And if I
politics.
I always thought Kılıçdaroğlu was going to be the candidate, because I think that Turkish political parties are by and large very undemocratic. But if I had been able to choose the CHP's candidate, I would have chosen Mansur Yavaş.
So we're having this conversation on the basis that, politics will still matter, electoral politics will still matter, yet we started off saying, or you did, and you're right, how the system is totally rigged. So going forward, Howard, are you hopeful that things can change in Turkey in the near future, that there can be a course shift towards democracy? And if so, what would be the trigger beyond natural causes, meaning Erdogan, he's a mortal like all of us and passing away?
Well,
Or
I
a
think
successful succession in the AKP, which is thing we should all be following.
I think that there are going to be succession crises, obviously in the CHP, among that coterie of parties on the racist right, and within the AKP itself. There's going to be change in the next 5 years. There's going to be. I think we're moving into a period not of sort of more of the same, but of instability. Whether that instability, I think that instability creates the possibility of a democratic opening, but I'm going to revert to my traditional pessimism. I think that that's the sunny but less likely scenario. I think that there's what we might get is something more authoritarian or more racist, or simply more unstable, but not necessarily more democratic. That said, if I were Turkish, I would be working for that long shot chance that there's going to that opening is something that we can capitalize on. Right? It's easy for me as an analyst to sort of say, well, the odds are long, but if you're a citizen, you have to work whether the odds are long or short, because it's your future and it's the future of your children.
Well, 48% voted against Erdogan. That's a huge number. It's not nothing. It's not 30%. It's not 20%. Of course, and Erdogan was able to win without really doing anything grotesque in terms of fraud, cheating. I mean, he's just, not so different to Orban or Duda in Poland, where he's,
and I think those are good comparisons.
But still creating, an aura of competitiveness that makes it legitimate enough. The worry is that how much further he has to go to remain in power in terms of, the rigging, the tinkering, and that's, there is, I think, a line that hasn't been yet crossed, but that might be, and we'll have to see.
I suspect, the most likely scenario, it seems to me, is that Erdogan will attempt, whether he'll be successful or not, I don't know, but he'll attempt to groom a successor over the next 5 years.
And we all kind of know who that is. That's his younger son-in-law, Selçuk Bayraktar.
Yeah, that I agree. I agree.
And who is, I think, a great sell. The guy is sort of like kind of cute and, very smart, super smart, very successful, and the brains behind something that has elevated Turkey globally, the drones.
That's right. That's right. And the AKP is the AKP has really sold that story.
Yeah, and let's not forget his wife, who is Erdogan's favorite daughter, who's traveled the world with him when she was still single, who I met, traveled with actually to Pakistan with, and who is also extremely bright, very political. And when you look at their social media, it's just crystal clear where this is going. And if I were the opposition, I would be scared shitless, if you want to, get power, it's going to be very hard, very hard.
I think that's right. I think that it's not the worst scenario. Right, the worst scenario is that the stirrings of rebellion that we see in the AKP get worse. We see an ascendant sort of racist right replacing, Bachelet's going to go in the next 5 years too, presumably, and how the dynamics of the AKP MHP coalition shake out is not clear. I mean, Süleyman Soylu is clearly vying for candidacy. It seems to me that he's being very aggressive and putting himself out as a personality outside of Erdogan. I would not my choice.
I just don't see him as a standalone. I think he is somebody because of Erdogan. For the sort of useful idiots out there will always say, "Oh, if left to Erdogan, he wouldn't be doing this." It's Soylu, blah blah blah.
That's not where I was going though.
I just don't buy any of that, and I also don't see him as viable, but that's a whole other conversation. Just one last thing, because I know you have another interview, Howard. So how should America be dealing with this government now?
I mean, for the United States to have consistent policy with Turkey, it would require Turkey to have a consistent policy about anything. Whether and one of the problems with a highly personalized foreign policy, which is what Erdogan has demonstrated, is that it makes it harder to be predictable. I think necessarily the U.S. can't simply say, well, Erdogan's not our kind of guy, so we're not going to deal with it. Turkey's a member of NATO. It's a member of other important international structures. It's a large country. It can't simply be written off. And so I think necessarily the United States is going to be transactional as well. I think that, if Erdogan has to become more sophisticated about how he deals with Congress, he can't just assume that a relationship with the White House is going to get him across the line. And the United States is going to look for places to cooperate. I mean, I'm not to take the F-16 deal. I'm not opposed to selling Turkey F-16s. They're going to buy jets from somebody. The question is, is it politically possible for the United States to sell F-16s while Turkey is still holding up its relations, NATO's acceptance of Sweden? Is it possible with the S-400 issue still outstanding for the U.S. to sell them F-16s. There's some very hard work to be done, and I don't think it'll be easy to succeed.
Well, of course, unless Trump wins.
Yeah, I mean, but Trump found that Trump wasn't a terribly effective. He thought he could do what he wanted, but it turned out that Trump has the same problem that Erdogan does. Just because you think that you should be able to determine outcomes doesn't mean you actually can. There are other forces in the world, right? I mean, to bring it back to Erdogan for a moment, Erdogan sort of has this sultanic imagination about, a highly centralized governance and him at the top, right? The fact that he lives in a saray is, in a palace is telling. But he misunderstands how sultans in the actual Ottoman Empire worked, and they had to negotiate all the time. They had to levy varying interests all the time. They weren't dictators. They were brokers.
Well, on that note, dear Howard, I'll let you go to your next interview. It was really great speaking to you. Thank you so much for making the time for us here at Al Monitor, and we look forward to reading your wonderful work.
It's always great to see you. Take care.
So that's it for today. I'm sure we'll be talking more Turkey in many episodes to come. Keep tuning in and make sure to visit our website, www.al-monitor.com, for in-depth coverage of the Middle East. Thank you and goodbye.